Joining us for this segment is Professor Michael Higginbotham. As the author of the book Race Law, Cases, Commentary, and Questions, his book is widely used in colleges and law schools throughout the United States. He's also published numerous articles and editorials and is currently working on his forthcoming book called Ghost of Jim Crow.
He is a multi-dimensional man, very much regarded for his awesome accomplishments, graduating magna cum laude from Brown, earning a law degree from Yale, an advanced law degree from Cambridge, where he attended as a Rotary Scholar. It is my distinct pleasure to present to you our esteemed guest speaker, Professor F. Michael Higginbotham.
Every time I get introduced in an event like this, I'm reminded of the first time I spoke. I'm talking about the original deal. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, oh yeah. Some of you may say, oh, come on, Professor, you're splitting the hairs there. You're splitting the hairs there because a right without a remedy, that's no right at all. Chief Justice John Marshall in Marbury versus Madison. One of the tricky aspects in this confirmation will be how should we view his advocacy of a client in terms of his qualifications to sit on the Supreme Court. What I think would be the most interesting race is to see a moderate or liberal black Republican. Somebody like a Colin Powell who's taken positions, strong positions in favor of affirmative action, in favor of abortion, and run them. That's the race to watch. Black folks in particular need to start valuing education, need to start demonstrating a understanding that not all failures result from discrimination, that there is also an aspect of personal responsibility where you got to start taking care of business. You've got to do that. Everyone needs to understand and recognize that, particularly black folks. Now, with that said, there's a whole lot of things that white folks need to do too. There's a culture of victimology that black folks are accused of, and that is true. And we need to change that. But there's also a culture of victimology among white folks, and it's often not recognized. I'll give you an example, affirmative action. One of the most controversial aspects, and we'll see how President Obama deals with it. He has talked a little bit about that. Very controversial aspect. You have to define affirmative action. A lot of people don't define it, and they end up arguing about the apples and oranges. Very few Americans support quotas. Supreme Court has said quotas are basically illegal unless there's a constitutional.
Because it discriminates against one as you're trying to make the playing field even for somebody else.
Absolutely.
Okay.
However, in this country, unfortunately, there are still practices that go on that in fact result in inequality of treatment. And while those practices may not, on their face, deal with race, the result is that there is still an inequality. We have to be very concerned about the current disparities that exist in employment, in education, in housing. We have to be very careful about that. We have clearly made tremendous progress in the country by eliminating overt discrimination, government-imposed discrimination. We've done a great job at that, and no longer is that permitted. But we still have tremendous inequalities in those areas, employment, education, housing. When you start looking at this affirmative action debate, you've got to understand we all need to recognize that, of course, there are whites that have lost opportunities due to affirmative action. Of course that's the case. But also, whites need to recognize that blacks and other minorities have lost opportunities because of racial discrimination. We have all been victimized in this society because of the inequality and the discrimination that has occurred in the past under law and the continued inequality that results from a failure to address it in its entirety today.
Immigration is a hot-button issue, no question about it, and it cuts across party lines and racial lines. You have the heavy immigration from Mexico, which some people view as sort of discriminatory if you try to restrict that immigration. On the other hand, you have concerns of economic concerns with keeping wages low. Big business wants that. And then you also have security concerns.
Sure.
So after 9/11, people are very concerned about terrorism and being careful about who's immigrating into the country and knowing where they are.
I have criticized some aspects of current law and the current approach, but now let me give you my solution. If we are ever to fully recognize those self-evident truths first created by the Founding Fathers, we must meet just like this in this room. We must continue this discussion on race. It is not going to be comfortable all the time, but it is a discussion that must take place. Look, Americans aren't any different based upon race. They all want good schools for their kids, safe neighborhoods to walk around in, services, adequate services. I still believe, as I think many Americans do, in the famous words in the Declaration, all persons are created equal. I still believe in that. I still believe in that promise. I still believe in that promise in the pledge, that important oath, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I still believe in that famous speech and that hope that Dr. King talked about, where he said, let freedom ring from every hill and valley. I still believe in it, and I still believe, as Langston Hughes, the famous poet, did, until the day that he died, in that famous dream. This dream today embattled with his back against the wall. To save the dream for one, it must be saved for all. Americans are resilient. Americans love liberty. And I believe that Americans love fair play and justice. And so I think that in the long run, we're going to be successful, both economically as well as in terms of racial equality. Thank you.